Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I call to order the meeting of the Manassas Park Governing Body for Tuesday, April 9th, 2024. First, we have the approval of the agenda. We have two changes. We will add a second public comment time, and added also is the city manager report. So that would be 7 public comment time, 8 city manager report, and then 9, 10, 11. Do we have a motion?
So
to
moved.
Second.
the amended agenda? Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you.
One point, no, there is no closed session tonight either. So no.
Oh, there is a closed session?
No, there's not.
There's none?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Please join us in a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to make public comment? Seeing no one and hearing no one, we will move on. We have 2 public hearings this evening. First public hearing is regarding the purchase of 9115 Digital Drive for use by Public Works, Community Development, and various city departments. I declare the public hearing open.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, members of the governing body. So you should have had in front of you 2 handouts related to this agenda item, an actual presentation that I'm going to cover tonight, and then the draft purchase and sale agreement negotiated with the property owner. You can ignore the date on that. That was just what he sent when he was ready to sign, but this is just a draft version for you all to review. Again, there's no vote on this tonight. It's just informational purposes. This is uploaded on the website as well, so you have time to review the purchase and sale agreement, send Dean and I any questions. But really the goal tonight is to go over the presentation, the background of why we're doing this, how the numbers work, and then we'll bring this back to an actual vote, the draft purchase and sale agreement. At that time, we can discuss the contract in more details if you guys have any questions. Put this here. Can you all still hear me if I do that? Okay, good. So it's just some reminder slides for the community and for you all as well. 2 facility liabilities that we had a few years ago when we were in a weak financial position that we were unable to address was the City Hall building and the Public Works building. All of our schools were built in the 2000s, well, the high school in 1999 and the other schools in the 2000s, our fire station, police station, and community center as well in the 2000s. The 2 buildings that were left off that didn't receive a new building were City Hall and Public Works, or Community Development, which includes the Development Services Division and also Public Works Division. We dealt with City Hall with the downtown development.
Could you point your microphone more towards
Sure.
your mouth? Yeah.
Is that better?
That is better.
All right, good.
Thank you.
And we wanted to address, we didn't lose sight of that. We had a plan for how we were going to address the community development building, but the City Hall was first. But at that time, we came up with estimates, kind of what the buildings would cost, what the unfunded capital liabilities were, and how we could utilize development to pay for these unfunded liabilities. So we haven't forgotten about community development and public works, and I've been pushing this for the last few years. So as an example, the model we did with City Hall when I presented this before, the downtown development was approved. I showed a model for how the Stanley Martin Homes would pay for the City Hall building. Here was the numbers that I showed at the recent town hall. And this is kind of mostly up to date. This was just a few months ago, but the numbers, we started receiving new revenues before we actually started payments, but you can kind of see what the profits look like through FY30 from that transaction, about $7.6 million in profit from the revenues minus the actual payments for City Hall. So $0 in existing taxpayer money never went to pay for this building. It was all paid for by the Stanley Martin homes. That's kind of the same model we want to utilize for the Community Development Department building. We also had requests from the schools. They wanted to construct a transportation facility so they can move their transportation department out of the middle school. So hopefully they could renovate that space for future CTE programming. That was the goal. Same thing with their maintenance facility. They were looking for new construction of a new facility then as well. Both these projects incredibly expensive, just like the community development building. So we wanted to come up with a solution that would not put the city in difficult financial situation, and an idea came up to acquire an existing facility that could accommodate both the community development department and also the schools as well. And that building was off of Digital Drive. You can see it on the map, the blue outline area. It's a unique building, and that's an industrial building surrounded by residential, which is not ideal from a zoning perspective. Public facilities surrounded by residential do make a little bit more sense. And again, that building was built in the 2000s as well, so it's in better condition, just like the other buildings that were built in the 2000s for other city departments. The plan was to, move the schools teams over and then hopefully retrofit those facilities for the CTE programming. And then for the existing Public Works building, we would look to redevelop that as we expand Kent Village Square commercial opportunities for our community on the west side of the city. And we'd want to generate revenue via an adjacent development to help pay for this acquisition and retrofitting. And I'm going to show you how the dollars work, but that's the red outline area. And again, this past summer, I went out and did town halls where I talked about this as well to the community, so it's not a surprise what's going on here. So a couple weeks ago, or actually last week, you received a presentation from AdTech where we were evaluating options about renovating the existing Public Works building for this purpose, or utilizing this 9115 Digital Drive building for this purpose. And this kind of just summarizes what the current situation is with that building. This is just a snapshot of the purchase sale agreement that, again, you guys have in front of you, and that's also uploaded on the website. Both this presentation and the purchase and sale agreement will be attachments to an agenda item for next week's meeting. Where you can see the key item here is the purchase price, $6 million for this building.
Can you say that again? I don't think it was picked up for the...
Sure, $6 million for the building. So as a reminder, what AdTech presented, there was three options. Options 1A really was not realistic. There's not a real belief that you could actually renovate the existing Public Works building because of the age. So really the two options to compare and contrast were option 1B, which is a complete rebuild, and option 2, which was the purchase of Digital Drive plus the renovations for combined $10.7 million just for the Community Development Department, and then $14.7 million when you also factor in schools, City Hall employees for the fourth level that we lost, and then some of the fire administration. What I'm recommending tonight is we don't do the City Hall or the fire administration. We first focus on community development and then move towards the schools, and then reevaluate what to do with the other staff so we don't spend more money than we have, and you'll see what the numbers look like. And again, so that was the majority view was that the better option was option 2. So I'm bringing this agenda back to you all based off that discussion from last meeting. So as part of the development in that red outline area that I showed you on a previous slide, the city actually owns a small portion of that land, the yellow outline, which is critical towards the development of this piece. We reached an agreement to sell this. There's a purchase and sale agreement already approved by the governing body for the development of these properties and the selling of this land. And we would get $1 million for the actual sale of the land. And the partner we're working with is D.R. Horton. They're going to develop 108 2/2 rental units as rental units to provide more 3-bedroom rental options for our residents, because right now we only have really studios, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms, some 2 bedrooms with dens, but not a lot of options. So there's not a lot of rental options for families right now, and with interest rates the way they are, it's very difficult to achieve home ownership for working class residents, so this is a good option for them. So in addition to the sale price, we would receive almost $1.9 million in profit cash out of this transaction, and we would also designate 5% of the units to be workforce affordable units. That's the current purchase and sale agreement. There may be a slight amendment coming in the future, which I'll update you all for consideration in the future. This was the concept plan showing the different residential units. You can see Digital Drive there on top. They have an emergency exit route as well to Digital Drive, so there's not only one way in and out, but these are what the units would look like. And this is the important part. So there's two budget slides that I have here. The next slide is kind of a summary slide of the numbers, but I wanted to present a phased view, so it's on record, and you guys at least receive my recommendation before I leave for how the best way to do this so you don't financially burden the city too much. Kind of a phased approach for how to do this. So the purchase cost, again, is $6 million. The initial upfront revenues that you're going to get from that development include the land sale, the proffers, and the tap fees. So you can see those numbers in yellow. The general fund CIP is already budgeted about almost $1.5 million for this, and then the water and sewer fund a net $1 million as well. So there was $2.5 million budgeted in the water and sewer fund, but $1.5 million of that is coming from the tap fees, an assumption of that. So we have some water and sewer CIP money we're throwing at this, and some general fund CIP. So the $6 million minus all those revenues, you net out a $931,000 initial profit. However, you can see that the land sale, the proffers, tap fees, right? Some of that may be delayed before getting this. We're talking about buying this building now. The D.R. Horton's about ready to submit this for rezoning. The rezoning and site plan approval should be done by the end of this calendar year, if not sooner, by this summer. So these revenues will be coming, but there will be some kind of delay in which we have to borrow from the general fund reserves and water and sewer reserves, $2 million from the general fund reserves and water, and then $1.5 million from water and sewer reserves. And once the rezoning happens, site plan approval, and you get this money, you then reimburse the general fund reserves and the water and sewer reserves. If that all happens within this fiscal year, then there's no financial impact. I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to get this money in FY25. So you'll be borrowing from reserves in '24 and reimbursing it in FY25. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so that's kind of phase one. You hold steady, you don't do anything until this becomes reality, until you get this yellow money, right, and you're financially stable, right? You're not borrowing any more from the general fund reserves. You wait a little bit, right? That building has some existing leases. You let the businesses there kind of end their leases, and you collect that revenue. So before I get into that revenue, the renovation costs are about, it's less than $5 million. I'm putting $5 million to be kind of conservative, but the estimate that we got for Public Works was slightly less than that. But assuming it's $5 million to renovate for the community development and Public Works, here's the revenues right below that renovation cost. So right below here, the revenues, you have that net carryover from above, the $931,000. You have 3 years worth of lease revenues from the existing leases. You're actually getting a little bit more than that, but I'm setting aside some of that for any emergency maintenance that has to be done towards that building, right? This is kind of the net that we would kind of carry in for that, so that's about $1.2 million. The first 5 years of real estate taxes and personal property taxes, you can see that amount. Net, you're generating kind of a profit about $1.2 million from the just the renovation cost. So an additional 5 years worth of real estate revenue and personal property. Again, just like the Stanley Martin, right? When we looked at it kind of over a few years to kind of pay for this building, when you look at it over kind of a 10-year model, your profits are about either $3.9 million or $2.9 million. Next slide will show $2.9 million. This slide shows $3.9 million because this is a public policy decision that you guys are going to have. You can see that the water and sewer fund is providing $1 million to this. You can say we don't want to do that, right? We want the development to pay for this 100%, right? The water and, the public works crew needs a building. So to me, it makes sense for the enterprise funds to contribute a portion of the funding for this. But this is a policy decision you guys have to make, whether the water and sewer fund helps pay for their own facility or that the adjacent development pays for this 100%. So if your policy preference is for the water and sewer fund to contribute the amount, the $1 million, then your profits are about $3.9 million. If you don't want that to happen, then your profits are $2.9 million. Why that's important is because the next renovation after that, phase 3, would be for the schools, right? So you step phase 1, you buy the building, and you wait for the initial money from D.R. Horton to pay for the purchase of the building. Step 2, after it's developed, you're collecting some lease revenue, you're collecting real estate tax money, you're collecting personal property tax money. When you have that money, you pay for the renovation for the community development department, which includes public works and development services. You move them into the building. Step 3, as you save more money, then you renovate for the schools to move the transportation and the facility teams over to that building, and then you think about what you can do for renovation of the high school and middle school for CTE programming in the future. Does that all make sense, the kind of the 3 phases of this? So please remember that. But if you want to kind of look at a snapshot of the total project, assuming you get all your money in, right, and you spend all your money, right, so kind of think about it from a fund balance perspective. And this one again shows the public policy decision of reimbursing the water and sewer fund. This is what it looks like, $2.9 million. So you have, let me bring this over here. So $11 million total dollars in expenditures for just community development department, not yet schools, right? And here's all your revenues from land sale, proffers, tap fees, lease revenues, real estate tax, personal property tax, 10 years, $2.9 million. Again, if you don't want to reimburse the water and sewer fund, $3.9 million, okay? That's, again, more than what the estimate was of what you needed for the renovation for the schools piece. So you have more than enough money for the schools.
Is there a downside to not reimbursing the water sewer fund?
I don't think so. I think they should contribute their fair share to the project. So my recommendation is that the water and sewer fund does contribute at least $1 million towards the project. Yeah, I mean, the only reason why you'd want the adjacent development to do that is you put $1 million back in the water and sewer fund, and as you get additional development, you may, depending on future costs, right, a full asset management plan is needed for water and sewer along with the rate study, but you may be able to actually start reducing rates in the water sewer fund. So if your public policy goal is to reduce water and sewer rates on residents, right, then you would reimburse it. Okay, that's an option, but you got to look at the numbers, the long-term numbers, and see if that's even a viable option or not.
Yeah, because we do hear a lot of feedback from the public about the cost of water.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
if that's the
Yeah.
preference, then again, you reimburse.
Okay.
You have the $3 million. That should still be sufficient for renovation, the remaining renovations needed for the schools.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that renovation's for that building to accommodate the school staff that we're moving from the middle school and high school, not to renovate the actual middle school and high school.
Okay.
We don't have the money, and you'll hear in the budget presentation tonight for that at the moment.
Okay.
So any questions?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, I've got 3 questions for you, and I apologize. My voice has been going out. So as far as striking the payment for the $6 million, how do we do that? Do we pay it all at once? Do we pay it in installments?
It's laid out in the purchase and sale agreement, right? There's like almost like a down payment, right? So it's kind of, if you read the purchase and sale agreement, it's kind of broken out where you pay a certain amount. It's kind of a down payment and then a certain amount additional during the study period. So it's kind of broken out there, and then when closing happens, when you pay the rest of the money.
Okay. Now, what happened on the off chance that this development doesn't come through? If that doesn't happen, how does that impact us purchasing the building?
You would buy the building, but you would lose $2 million in general fund reserves and $1.5 million in water and sewer reserves.
So we'd have to somehow find that money.
Yeah. Yep.
Bake sale, go into reserve, something.
Yeah, you'd have to accept kind of a reduction in reserves. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question, you talked about Phase 2 and Phase 3.
Mhm.
What is the rough timeline for Phase 2 to happen, then Phase 3?
Yeah, and that's more of a public policy decision again. If you wanted to wait for the money to arrive before you do stuff, you're waiting 5 years from now to do the renovations for the community development. My recommendation is you do it in 3 years, right? Again, you borrow a little bit from reserves and then pay it back over the subsequent 2 years for the community development department. And then again, if you want to wait an additional 5 years after that for the schools, you can do that. But again, my recommendation is borrow from reserves and then just have it paid back over 5 years from the development, so you can quickly pivot and free up space for the schools. Or you can wait and see what the timeline is for the renovation at the schools, right? When do we even have the money to do that piece to move them out? So that one I don't think is as urgent until you figure out a way to come up with the money for the CTE renovations at the high school and middle school.
Okay.
But definitely, I think community development, public works, that is a little bit more urgent, so I would recommend doing that in 3 years and then, paying it back 2 years after that.
Do you have a follow-up? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I think you did a great job presenting this, and I'm very supportive of this. The only question I have, because I know this project came up 10 years ago, there's a utility that goes across the street, there's a pole, and I asked that about 10 years ago when they brought or 8 years ago when they brought this project. I just want to make sure that that utility gets underground across the street here.
Yeah, that's a requirement, I think, but we'd have to send me an email, or actually, staff, you can remind me tomorrow. I'm going to email them to start the engagement with Novec now to,
Right.
again, assess the,
Because I think
how to do
that was the only pole that stands on that property. It goes
I believe
across the
so,
street
yeah.
because it's, I think it was like 80,000.
There might be another pole as well. Yeah.
So I'd like to see that one just done, just to be, and then the other question I have, they'll consistently put the lights, the summer lights to the downtown.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, for the presentation. It is an exciting proposition, and I just love the way you piece together things so that we can make things happen and not impact our residents' taxes in doing that. I have some questions. Have we appraised the lot that we own that we're going to sell, the $1 million?
We have not gotten a formal appraisal, but I can tell you, what I can tell you is that in the downtown, the properties are selling for about $1.5 million per acre. This is just outside the downtown, but it's still kind of at that same rate. So this is more than market kind of equivalent.
And the asking price for the digital building, I mean, I'm in favor of it, but have we had that appraised as well?
Yes, we're actually getting a better deal on that one. We didn't get it appraised, but it's actually now lower than the assessed value.
Okay.
So time is to act now versus wait for the assessed value.
And it's pretty good. Horton is really interested in developing housing, the 108 units, giving us 5% affordable housing, workforce housing. Do you know what AMI, area median?
That hasn't
income?
been laid out yet. I think that will be up to your discretion to direct the next city manager during the negotiations when they're ready for rezoning, or if they're ready for rezoning when I'm still here, to kind of negotiate that, because we don't have an official ordinance. So it's something they'll voluntarily proffer, right? And they asked us, what we want to utilize. Yvette's done some kind of research already, where we haven't completed yet the affordable housing study. Hopefully we're done with that by May, and we can actually then at that point inform them about kind of what the recommendations are for what AMI to utilize at that time.
Okay. And the zoning that's going to be required, I'm assuming there's going to be rezoning required to put those two parcels together and allow them to build the housing?
Well, yeah, because all that's zoned in, these
Industrial,
two
light industrial?
parcels. Let me grab the mic. The two parcels not in yellow are zone industrial. The yellow one is zone public facilities. So all of this has to be rezoned. And then for kind of combining the parcels, that's the subdivision process, where they'll change the boundaries of the parcel and just combine them into one parcel.
And then the question about the enterprise funds, the sewer and water, they're healthy funds. I thought the water, one of those. had
You'll see that
problems.
later in the budget presentation, but yeah, they do have a healthy reserve
Fund
right
balance,
now, but
okay.
we're actively spending that down for capital purposes. But again, you'll see later it kind of dips into the negative for a while before kind of bouncing back up, because the debt picture starts improving in the 2030s for both sewer and water. So you're able to kind of spend all the capital requirements, spend that fund balance down, and then you kind of replenish the fund balance as debt goes down. Then you're going to have opportunities after you get it back to roughly $2.2 million, right? You have the opportunity then to make policy decisions, assuming you don't have continual massive inflation of 6% like we had over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
You'll have the opportunity then to just really look at your rates and see if they can come down at that point.
Your point about the rates, do we know what UOSO is going to do as far as, or just what the water rates will be like?
Well, that's Fairfax Water and Manassas, and that's a great point. We can't really
Right.
control that. The problem with our water and sewer enterprise is we don't really control our costs. We're paying whatever Fairfax Water charges, and then Prince William puts an added surcharge on that because we collect, Prince William's the one providing it to us, but they're buying it from Fairfax, and then whatever Manassas decides to charge us. So we're kind of at their mercy. The same thing with sewer. It's whatever UOSA is charging us. You'll see in the budget tonight, those have all been going up, and that's the negative impact, right? So that's kind of, those are, even though they're not technically fixed costs, they're costs that you don't have control over. You don't really have a budgetary say in. And so it's, if those skyrocket to your point, if they skyrocket, then you can't have the discussion of decreasing rates. You have to discuss increasing rates. because we don't
And
produce
my
our own
concern
water.
is what the mayor has pointed out, is that we hear from our residents about how high our water
Yeah.
and sewer bills are, that if we had the reserves, we could offset any increases by the water to our residents through the reserves.
It's not through the reserves, it's just, you can deal with your capital liabilities, right? And then you can keep your reserves above negative, right? You don't want it to go negative where the
Right.
general fund's subsidizing it, unless you want to do a policy decision where the general fund
Negative.
subsidizes the water and sewer fund, but that's not recommended. But at least keeping it positive while funding your capital with more reserves, more tap fee revenues from additional developments, you can do that. And that's how the best way to actually reduce the rates is that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Follow-up?
Appreciate the, no,
Follow-up?
that was good, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Think about that.
How many tenants are in the building now?
That I don't know. If I have the rent rolls, so I'll go back and dig that up and I'll send you the email.
And do we know when the leases are up?
3 years was the max.
3 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's why he wants a decision now, because there's some that are coming up now. So if we buy this, at least what my recommendation to you all is, we tell everyone whose lease is coming up that you have 3 years, right? And we set it kind of a 3-year period for when your lease is up, and that we help them look for we look for spaces like we did for the CDL truck. We found them actually a better space than this one. They were very happy with that.
Follow-up questions from anyone? Okay. Last call, okay. Okay, public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment on the public hearing? Seeing no one and hearing no one, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. We will vote next week, April 16th. Our second public hearing is regarding an ordinance for tax relief for the elderly. I declare the public hearing open. Dean, is that you?
It can be.
Okay.
This is, the Commissioner of Revenue requested this. She noticed that a few of the people who are given the relief, the real estate tax relief, through the elderly and disabled ordinance of the city had fallen out of the program because the limits had not increased to reflect reality. So she had requested that $10,000 be added to the limits on income, and then the total limit, or the limit on total value of property increased from 150 to 175. This ordinance just does that.
Okay. Any comments or questions? No? Okay. There are no governing body questions. Is there any comment from the public on the second public hearing? Seeing no one and hearing no one, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you, Dean. Okay,
Welcome.
moving on to new business, our work session for proposed FY25 budget.
Okay, good evening again. Tonight I'm proposing the FY25 budget, and at the end I'll kind of recap kind of the upcoming schedule for the review process and public hearings and decisions that need to be made. I'll start off with some highlights before I kind of go into more details, but this is kind of the meat and potatoes, it's the highlight. So just like in the last couple of years, just presenting kind of the number one issue for residents, the number one issue for employees. So starting off with the number one issue for residents, in my proposed budget, I'm looking at reducing the real estate tax rate by 4 pennies in FY25. That's equivalent to a tax relief for about $1 million to our residents. That's on top of the last 2 years combined tax relief of around $3 million. So that's a significant tax rate reduction. So the rate was at 155 back in 2021, or spring of 2021, and with this budget, you'll be reducing it to 139, and more importantly, you will no longer have the highest tax rate in Virginia. That's been a goal for the longest time, and this is how you get it. To do that, though, and I'm going to cover this in the next few slides, you have to do some tax reform, right? And we'll go over kind of the details for how you do the tax reform to kind of get things a little bit more equivalent to kind of how the rest of the region does taxes, okay? One challenge we have from a tax-based standpoint, though, is just weaker economic revenues, and that's from just sales tax figures being dropped as kind of the state audits kind of who are Manassas Park businesses and who are not. Number one issue for employees in this budget, there's a COLA of 3% at a cost of $567,000. Operational excellence, which we talk about, we've done a lot over the last few years. Unfortunately, we can't do any more for adding staffing. We just have a lot tighter budget when you look at the spreadsheet that's now posted on the website. It's just a much tighter fiscal situation. We've reduced the rate very quickly. We've done a lot of pay raises over the last few years. We've added FTE, so now we're kind of stuck at the service level where we're at right now. So I'm not proposing in the model any new FTEs until FY30, with one exception, which is the tax auditor for the Commissioner of Revenue's office to help with revenue auditing or tax auditing to hopefully bump up revenues. I see that as more of an investment. I think that will return greater yield back to the city. But again, I don't want to risk it, or I don't recommend risking until 28. I think you got to stabilize your budget first. We've frozen positions. I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago when I started looking at the long-range data about kind of how weak our position was over the next few years. I sent out an email to staff that there was a hiring freeze and they needed to check with Keith and I on any hiring. And these were some of the positions that we had frozen, including a police sergeant, streets crew worker, some of the fire department promotions for manning the ladder truck, IT help desk support, mechanic, and building official, and there's a few others based off policy decisions that you're going to make here in this budget.
Laszlo, is the building official, is that the zoning enforcement?
That is not, no.
Okay, is
Right.
the zone?
No, I'll get to that on the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the building official, unfortunately, your building official is your community development director,
Okay.
and that's just not a good way of doing business. But we haven't been able to recruit a building official, right, in the last 2.5 years. So that's why we can, in the long run, I don't think it makes sense to do that. I think you got to try to recruit a building official. We just haven't been able to recruit it, so that's one of the positions that we froze to help keep a stable budget. So unfortunately, no new staffing for a while is my recommendation, and keeping positions frozen until FY30 as well. Infrastructure, overall non-transportation CIP is really flat. It's up $33,000. That's below inflation. Far below. Transportation is way up, but that's because we're getting a lot of money. Thanks to Calvin and Steve and the team. We're just getting a lot of federal funding for transportation, so it's not necessarily a financial impact on our residents. So we are doing a lot to improve our transportation infrastructure, but for the rest of the CIP, below inflation because of our weaker financial situation. But I'll give you kind of some recommendations for how to tackle that. Financial responsibility, again, we don't meet reserve targets via the budget strategy. We did that last year as well, but that's because we've had a much stronger growth in our reserves over the last few years. And again, my recommendation to you all is for both reserves and CIP, as you generate additional annual budget surpluses, you tuck that away to keep building your reserves since we're no longer budgeting extensive for that purpose, and to fund those delayed or unfunded capital projects that we're just not able to do, right? That's kind of one-time money, so you don't utilize that for structural things that have long-term financial impacts. You do it for kind of one-time items like a reserve contribution or a payment or of a capital project. So the tax reform I was talking about, if you look at the region, what you'll notice is that our real estate tax rate is way too high and our personal property tax rate is way too low. These are the numbers looking at all the jurisdictions in Northern Virginia. You can see we have the lowest personal property tax rate by far, and we have the highest real estate tax rate by far. Just looking at our peers, right, our sister cities and the towns that are kind of our equivalent size, you can see kind of what the real estate tax rates look like, and you can see that even adjusting the personal property tax, right, to $4, so you can reduce your real estate tax rate down to $139, so that you are now not the highest real estate tax rate in Virginia, you're still below the average personal property. That's why I'm calling this tax reform, because you're taxing your home ownership a lot, and you're not taxing car ownership equivalent to kind of what the rest of the region is. So I'm just showing you kind of what the rest of the region, how they do taxation, and my recommendation is you guys do a similar tax reform to kind of adjust this so you can actually get your real estate tax rate down, because your real estate tax rate is higher because your personal property tax rate is lower. Again, we have the lowest personal property tax rate right now. We never really get credit for that from our residents. What our residents do hit us up on a lot is that we have the highest tax rate in the whole region. With this policy, you will still have, when looking at all of our peers, you will still have the third lowest personal property tax rate. When you're looking at all of the jurisdictions and when you take out the counties, you will have the second lowest personal property tax rate, but you will now no longer have the highest real estate tax rate. So by raising the personal property tax rate to just below the average, we can reduce our real estate tax rate so it's no longer the highest. You can then start looking at kind of the average real estate tax rate as kind of a target, right? If you pull out Fairfax City, which to me is kind of an outlier in tax rates when you look at everyone else, that's a target of $1.32, right? That means we only have 7 cents more to go to kind of get to the peer average of real estate tax burden on our residents. However, one caveat, we have by far the weakest tax base compared to all of our peers and everyone else in Northern Virginia. We deal with Northern Virginia salaries, Northern Virginia prices, but we don't have a Northern Virginia tax base. So by having competitive tax rates, which is good for our residents, you're by definition underfunding the services of the city, because you're just not generating enough money to pay for those things because of the weak tax base. That's just something to think about when you enter into this discussion. It's a policy decision you guys have to evaluate. You can't, it's mathematical, right? If you're gonna have competitive tax rates with the weakest tax base, that has to come from somewhere, and it's gonna come from underfunding your city services in comparison to the rest of the region. You can say that that's fine, and that's a public policy decision, but that's just a mathematical reality. So tax implications, so the average home value, $423,000. The average personal property tax bills, assuming kind of the 2 vehicle per household as we do in our zoning. You can see kind of how it nets out, right? For how much your tax bill goes down from a real estate standpoint and how much up your personal property tax bill goes up. If you have more cars, you're going to pay a little bit more taxes, right? This year, if you have more cars. But that's the whole point. Currently, we're excessively taxing home ownership while undertaxing car ownership. We hear complaints about the excessive number of cars that we have per each residential unit, causing parking shortages and traffic in our city, along with negative environmental impacts. And our tax policy reinforces that.
Yeah.
So what I'm presenting is this tax reform budget for you all to consider. If you guys don't like this tax reform idea and want to just go back to kind of the base budget, there are some implications to that, and I'm going to go over what those implications are. And again, this is your policy decision about how you want to move this forward. But the real estate tax rate would remain the highest in all of Virginia at 142 if we don't do this tax reform. Your COLA would only be 2% instead of 3%. Mind you, the rest of the region is somewhere around average of 4.5%. So even with the 3%, we're still falling behind. Just like the schools are unfortunately now falling a little bit behind from Manassas and Prince William County. We'd be falling behind as well, but not as much, right? And we want to try to stay as close as possible. Our employees deserve that. Additional 3 positions would have to be frozen, and this is the mayor, your question. This would be the zoning and building inspectors, which are required for enforcement of the rental district, overcrowding, and short-term rentals, along with the parking enforcement officer, which is critical for the enforcement of the commercial parking ban, decals and personal property tax compliance, downtown parking violations as we start to get businesses there, and potentially implement 2-3 hour parking zones as well to help out our businesses. We're just not going to have the same parking enforcement capability. Again, this is a policy decision. You can be fine with this, right? You can be fine with lower service levels, but then it's up to you to let residents know we've made this decision, right? This is kind of the tax policy we want to have. This is what the service levels it pays for.
Well, I can tell you, I'm very concerned about not hiring a zoning enforcement officer. I mean, illegal renting is across the city, and I don't think it's going to get any better. It's going to get worse. It has infrastructure implications. Like you say, there's parking, you know.
And this is what we'll discuss in work sessions, right?
Yeah.
I'm presenting to you guys
Okay.
my recommendation, and then I think
Okay.
this is what you guys are going to have to deliberate on. You're going to have a frank conversation with each
Okay.
other, with the community, about what kind of tax policy you want to have, what kind of service levels you want to fund as well. The one CIP impact as well, the comp plan, I had previously had to push that back to 27. By doing this tax reform, I was able to bring it back to FY25. Why that's important is because the comprehensive plan is supposed to guide your CIP from a policy standpoint, and right now the Planning Commission, they don't have an updated guide. When they review the CIP, their comprehensive plan is outdated, and they have nothing to go off of. So again, the following slides tonight, I'm showing you what the numbers look like with my tax reform budget. The tax adjusted budget is what I'm calling it. So I'm going to go over the guidance that you all provided, give you an executive summary of the budget, the total city budget overview from both the general fund, enterprise funds, and then talk about next steps. So going over your priorities, these are your top 10 priorities that you guys ranked. And again, it's based off of kind of the programs, right? When you guys did your strategic plan a few years ago, economic development was kind of the top. Number 2 was balanced slicing of the pie. Number 3, community maintenance. 4, infrastructure. 5, financial management, service delivery, and then you had a miscellaneous. Your strategic plan kind of ends this year, so you're going to have to work with your new city manager, the new council members in January to craft an updated strategic plan with updated program goals. But from your top 10 list from that, the first 2, general economic development in downtown, those I've kind of briefed to you in closed session, kind of what the answers are for those, right? The only thing you may want to consider from a budget standpoint down the road is hiring an economic development professional, depending on the qualifications of the next city manager. That may be one thing you guys need to consider. For balanced slicing of the pie, here's the challenge. You can't do number 4. We can't close the pay gap right now. We just don't have the money we're about $2 million behind our peers, and there's just no money under the current tax base to pay for that, unfortunately. Number 3, with the tax reform budget, we get the 3% target. Without the tax reform budget, we're down to 2%. So that's a maybe. For number 5, again, with the tax reform budget, it's a yes, 4-cent reduction in 25. Without the tax reform budget, you're at 1 cent tax adjustment. For community maintenance, that goal, again, it's a yes with the tax reform budget, it's a no without the tax reform budget. For infrastructure, you're fine from a transportation standpoint. You're doing a lot, and that was your number 1 thing from an infrastructure. Your number 1 priority was continue funding transportation. Thanks to Calvin and Steve, you're fine. You're getting a lot of federal funding to take care of that. And we're adding a lot more money for annual resurfacing and sidewalk repair as well. Financial management, that's a yes as well. You're fully funding your ERP with expected completion of summer 2026. The only thing unbudgeted for right now that I do recommend we look at is a new CAMA system for our city assessors. It's a very outdated program, so that's kind of the last kind of technology piece you would need from a financial perspective.
Really quick,
Yeah.
for the folks at home, and even for me, to refresh my memory, CAMA system, what is that?
Yeah, that's the system, your assessment system, right? That's where they plug in every single parcel and assess, like all the background information and assessment data, stormwater, ERU data, and then that file is supposed to talk with your tax software that the Commissioner of Revenue manages so that she can develop her tax book. Right now, it doesn't talk to it. Right now, the Commissioner of Revenue has to do manual entry,
Okay.
which is a no-no.
Yeah.
Again, so
That-
you
yeah.
want to have an integrated system. So that's the last kind of piece.
Thank you.
Yep. From a service delivery standpoint, unfortunately, again, we talked about this before, their number 1 priority was hiring the communication director who's bilingual, who has a strong social media background. We can't get that funded right now. I think the opportunity for that is that as people leave, right, what I've recommended to the staff here is evaluate each position as they leave and see if it's more important to bring that position back or to fund a position like this, right? This is a priority for you all, so that's my recommendation. If there's a position that leaves unless it's absolutely critical, right, and that's the deliberations that you guys will have to do, you can freeze that position and then use that money to hire a position like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of the decision making you're going to have to be making over the next few years is as you're looking to add positions, it's really going to have to come from freezing or eliminating other positions as people leave. Okay, and then set aside $5,000 for a feasibility location study for a citywide skateboard park. That is funded. It's a very small dollar amount, so that is funded. All right, so executive summary, just the operating budget, right? Not talking about capital, not talking about debt, not talking about reserves, just the operating budget. You can see revenues grew by 4%, expenditures grew by just under 6%, and you'll see later on the slide kind of what those expenditures are, where they come from. Revenue growth came from both stronger real estate and personal property tax revenues, and overall stronger economic growth tax revenues, even though sales tax went down, B pulls up, and meals taxes are up as well. So that's a good news there. But your departmental revenues have gone down, and one of the big drivers of that is just photo enforcement revenue, which is a good story, right? The revenues are down because there's better compliance with speeding and red lights, which we always knew was going to happen. It's a financial impact for funding, specifically the maintenance, the implementation of the school's safety program that we did with the ballistics and the cameras and all that. That just means if those revenues continue to drop further, then the general fund's going to have to pick up that tab. 3% COLA costs around $557,000. That is accomplished in FY25, but 0 FTEs. A 4-cent real estate tax rate reduction is $169 average savings from the tax rate reduction. We've reduced the tax rate again by 16 cents since 2021, which is pretty robust. Capital budget, I've already discussed this, the only $33,000 increase, but the key point here, it's $6 million less than what the departments are requesting for funding kind of the service levels that we're looking for, that are demanded, right? We've cut the CIP by about $6 million. That's where it goes back to, as you get surpluses, start funding that $6 million. Debt and reserves, debt remains unfortunately flat, right? There's not, unless there's other opportunities for refinancing, which we'll always look at. Maybe there will be. I mean, interest rates are pretty high right now, but again, we'll talk to our financial advisors and see what opportunities exist, but it's going to remain flat until 32. And reserve strategy, again, utilize your annual surpluses to reach your target. Enterprise funds, water and sewer, the average rate increase and the FY25 rate increase is 3%. That's matching inflation, actually just under inflation for right now. And again, we don't control most of our costs for water and sewer, and you'll see kind of what the drivers are of those increases. Stormwater is great news, 2.5% rate increase in 25 and 2.5% average over 10 years. That's down from almost 6% average every year increase, and I'll show you the dollar savings to our residents. Two sources of those savings over the last 2 years. We've done a couple things. One, we've identified another project that's cheaper for the city, the Bird Sanctuary stream restoration versus the Russia Branch stream restoration. That saved a lot of money in future years. And then we were just awarded the congressional directed funding to fund about $1 million out of the $1.5 million project for the Bird Sanctuary stream restoration. So that's a huge saving for our residents, and that means that rate increases are below inflation. Solid waste, 5% rate increase, that's down from 8%. So every year we've been decreasing the growth and the model as well. Two reasons for that: additional development, right, bringing in additional users or additional people paying that, and also the facility charge as well, that I'll show you in a later slide for trash. Okay, so looking at the total budget across all items, including capital, you can see it's about a $13.7 million increase. However, the majority of that is transportation, right? The spending is around $12.9 million for transportation. That's the biggest driver of the increase, but again, that's largely federal and state funded. So that's a good, anytime you're spending more on transportation, that's good news. That means you've won money to help improve your transportation, which continues to be a high priority for our residents. The next big driver is schools. We're spending about $1.25 million more for schools. Operating total, that removes capital, that removes debt, that removes reserves. This is a new view this year that I'm showing, because I've always had to do the math separately to show you what the operating increase was. This is just showing you what it looks like on this table here. You can see it's $106 million. That's less than what was on the previous slide. About $3.2 million growth in revenue, majority coming from property taxes, but again, your departmental revenues are down. That's kind of one negative that's happening right now. The biggest drivers of expenditures in FY, and I'm sorry, this is mislabeled here. This should be FY24 and that should be FY25. So my apologies for that. The biggest drivers of growth in expenditures, you can see the human services plus economic development. That's not human services, that's purely economic development. That's the ARPA TI program.
That's the ARPA.
ARPA TI, tenant improvement. That's what that growth is. It has nothing to do with actual human services. So I wanted to point that out. Your water and sewers up as we increase, as we get additional charges from UOSA and for our water purchase as well. And then schools is the other big driver of that increase in FY25. Going to the general fund specifically, this is the operating view, again, eliminating reserves, debt, and capital. And you can see the net, this is what's available for those other things, for reserves, debt, and capital. Your budget's around $55 million. So before I got here, this was all that was shown in the table, right? And then your CIP and everything else was kind of done in separate sections of the budget. I consolidated everything to give you kind of a full view, but this is kind of going back more apples to apples to look at historically what the total operating expenditures look like. And to sum up, so it's about a $2.9 million increase. And here's the drivers. I promised I would show you what the drivers were. About $2.7 million of the 2.9 comes from the pay raises, $567,000, $275,000 for VRS and health impacts, which I'll describe in a couple slides, the majority of that being the VRS, the retirement system impacts to us. $700,000 increases in ARPA tenant improvement, right? That's ARPA funded. And then the $1.15 million in contributions to schools. All that equals $2.7 million. That's your driver of your increased spending. So as you look at, if you want to do cuts in your budget, right, these are the drivers of growth in your budget. I'm sorry, and I forgot to mention, this is kind of what the pay raise looks like. This is the salary portion, and this is the benefits portion of a 3% raise. All right, so the total budget, including capital and reserves and debt, it's about $110 million. And just as a reminder for the public, capital is kind of counted twice, right? One as a transfer from the operating budget to the capital fund, and then the total capital spending as well. And you can see this is the biggest driver of growth, and that's from transportation, which is growing by almost $13 million. Fund transfers, I'm pointing that out because this is largely ARPA, and that's going to go away largely in FY26 unless we carry it over. But you'll see that fund transfer number start to drop. And then again, transfers to debt, capital, and reserves are the biggest kind of chunk of that budget. Less transfer to the capital due to all the CIP reductions that we had to do. All right, where your money comes from, breaking down a dollar bill. The majority is still your property taxes, real estate and personal property tax. That was 72% in FY19, so we've gotten the burden down by 7 percentage points over the last few years, but a lot more is needed if we ever want to get to 50-50. Where your tax dollars go, you see the biggest chunks are schools and public safety. Debt was 24.1% in FY19 as well, down to 11.7%, so we keep getting that debt percentage share down of the total budget. Personnel versus operations. So you can see where 43% of our costs are personnel versus 57%. What that means to me when I look at this is that personnel are underfunded. We have a gap in terms of salary, right? We have less FTEs per capita. So when you compare to other jurisdictions, personnel is usually going to be higher than your others. But we have other fixed costs like electricity and other things, maintenance service contracts, fuel, the same thing as other jurisdictions, but this is a lower number here. In terms of that personnel, the breakdown, 82% is salary, and you can see the breakdown. But the big changes this year, fortunately there wasn't an increase in our health insurance premium, but what there was as we hired employees, right, when an employee left and a new employee came in, they ended up taking, so if a previous employee who left didn't have a plan, the new employee would come in and have a plan, or if someone had a single plan, they'd take a dual plan or a family plan, baby's born, right? So the health insurance costs went up, not because of any premium increases, but just because of change in plans, and that was about roughly a $30,000 impact to the city, but another $240,000 impact from VRS. There was 2 changes made for VRS. One, we had to increase the percentage of contribution to the pension fund, and that cost around $120,000. And 2, VRS did a reform for how you do hybrid local matching for hybrid employees. Those are non-public safety employees and employees who who were hired in the VRS system after a certain date. I believe it's 2012. I always forget the date, so my apologies. But the way it used to work was the city contribution came from the same pension contribution. There's 2 parts or 3 parts to the retirement system for your hybrid employee. One is the fixed pension. Think of Social Security. You're guaranteed a certain check, right? When you retire, that's the pension fund. 2, those employees have a 401k. That means they have a certain amount that's set aside for investment account. And 3, they have a voluntary kind of secondary 401k, it's a 457 plan, where they can contribute a certain amount and the city will match up to 2.5%. Before, the city matches for the 401k and the 457 came from the pension contribution, which made no sense from a system standpoint because all that was variable, right? Now they finally made the reform where your pension amount is fixed based off of how much you need to have a guaranteed benefit, right? A defined benefit. And now your defined contribution is separated from that. So now the locality now has to contribute in addition to the pension fund. We actually have to now separately contribute for the 401k and 457 contribution. I know that's complicated. Is there any questions about that? But I know that's a little bit complicated for how that works. But if you have any questions, let me know. I can address that. But that's an additional $120,000 cost to the city from separating the local contribution, pulling that from the pension contribution to your 401k and 457 contribution. The hope, though, is now there's more money going into the pension fund. So hopefully in the next year or 2, your percentage contribution to the pension fund can go down. And so maybe this $120,000 you'll get back in future years. Okay? All right, department nets. This is slightly inflated because of ARPA. So next year, I think you're going to have a more realistic view of department nets. One example of how this is inflated. This is not your true Parks and Rec expenditures. There's about $3 million worth of ARPA capital rolled into that, right? So this number is a little bit wonky this year. We didn't take out ARPA in our department nets, but this is kind of, there's no real change to this slide. I won't spend too much time on it, but again, some of these are state supported. Some need more state support, like our police and fire, HB 599. Fire barely gets anything from the state, and then revenues from sales is what drives revenues for Parks and Rec. But the key here is that $32.5 million spending has an impact on taxes, about $22.7 million. You can subtract that a little bit more because of ARPA as well, which we didn't factor out of this analysis. The 10-year model for the general fund, again, it's very tight the first few years. The property, so economic development tax revenue is a little bit less than kind of previously forecasted. Property taxes, we're still assuming assessment growth of 2.5%. We've been beating that every year, but we like to budget conservatively as much as possible. That gives you more options in the future, but you can see here kind of how those revenues are forecasted to grow. Fund transfers, this is what I mentioned. You see how big this number is in 25. ARPA goes away, and that starts dropping, and that decreases your total budget. And then again, Health and Human Services, we talked about it. It's really your ARPA tenant improvement program in the Community Services Department. You can see it drops once that money goes away, unless it's carried over. That's the one caveat, right? We may be coming back to you all next year and showing that the number is the same because we didn't spend it and it's just carried over. And then you can see the capital, the transfer for capital, how that fluctuates, and a lot of that again is ARPA because there is a lot of transfer utilizing ARPA money to capital. I'll skip the next slide because that just shows kind of over the 10-year model how your revenues and expenditures grow. But to summarize all that, your budget growth over the 10-year period, the average is around 2.47%. You can see that drop in 26. That's really because you're out of ARPA money at that point, so it's just a budget correction. Your budget's naturally higher when you have ARPA money. ARPA money goes away, so it looks like the budget goes down. It just comes back to reality, right, of what you can spend on an annual basis. But overall, the average is around 2.47%, which is below where inflation's at right now. And we don't know if the Federal Reserve is going to be able to get inflation back down to 2% or if it's going to stay at 3%. Reserves, that's part of that. And also we're contributing a lot more for schools in latter years because you saw in their presentation there is risk, right? With their pay raises cost a lot more, right? They have a lot more employees than we do. So whenever they do certain pay raises, it costs a lot more. And you can see there's long-term structural deficits there that the city's going to have to pick up the tab, and that's what we show here as well. Real estate plan, you can see kind of where their rates are, where they're slated. So 4 cents reduction in 25, but just like we can't add any FTEs, we're kind of stuck at that rate unless, hopefully, again, if assessments grow faster, right, then you can keep doing the rate reductions and the hopefully additional pay raises above what I'll be showing here as well. And again, there's potential to decrease this faster with additional development. That's what's allowed us to decrease as well. It's not just increases in assessed value, it's also added stock to the tax base itself. And then you can see the FY19 model. When I talked about we've done things a little bit faster than prior model projections, this is what we were going to do. So in 25, we were supposed to be at like a $1.52 rate. We're actually down to 139. So we're doing a lot more in terms of rate reductions than previously planned in FY19. This is where I talked about where we've fallen further behind with salary competition. We're about $2 million behind our peers in FY24 dollars. That's only going to grow. Hopefully COLA will slow down, right, that gap. But we're behind and we're unable to tackle it right now. That's the problem. We did large raises in 23, but unfortunately everyone else did raises as well. And this gap cannot be closed without a stronger tax base. That's just math.
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know what our median income is compared to other jurisdictions?
Yeah, it's kind of mixed, but we've definitely improved. You're talking about resident median income.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started here, I think we were kind of in the 40s, and from all localities in Virginia. I think we're down now like to 17. So we've improved our median income levels. That's why I think you see property values kind of rising. They just haven't caught up to the rest of Northern Virginia.
Right, so, but the actual number, is it like 45,000? Is it 50,000?
Median incomes are, I would say, in the 70s, but I got to look at that.
I think they're at 87,000 now.
Yeah.
I know when we looked,
It was 83 like 3 years ago.
yeah, I know when we looked last year, we were looking at different jurisdictions, we're extremely below.
Yeah, we are. We still are.
Yeah.
We're getting better, but we still are below. And then our property values too. You're playing catch up. You pick up these condo units here, you put them in a Fairfax City, the value goes up
Yeah.
$300,000.
Yeah, I know.
So even though they
I
have a
see
lower
the
tax rate,
signs.
you're still paying more taxes there
Right.
because the value goes up.
Right, I see the signs when I drive to Fairfax.
Yeah. Okay, so pay raises, we're only able to do COLAs, and right now the model has them below inflation, unfortunately. That's all we can afford at this point, unless things change. 2.5% is what we're projecting, doing 3% in 25. But again, this is going to be dependent on assessment growth, right? The faster it grows, the faster we're catching up to the rest of Northern Virginia, the lower your tax rate can go, and the higher your salary can go. Economic development revenue as a share is down because of that sales tax adjustment that I talked about earlier. And then economic growth projection still 4.6%, and again, the projection of the downtown being built in FY26 to help with our revenues, along with other Route 28 projects like the Popeyes. Annual debt, again, relatively flat until you get to FY31. There's a slight decrease, and then really 32 and 34 where you're going to get the majority of your debt savings. Again, the debt is down by almost $100 million since FY16. We've cut the majority of our debt. We're staying disciplined with that, and this is what I project your future debt capacity to be, right? So when you're doing your facility renovations in the 30s for your schools, for all your buildings, this is kind of what you're going to be able to borrow depending on interest rates. Again, I'm going to put this in all my budget documents, but recommendation is wait for the 30s for interest rates to drop, and that's when you borrow. Right? Be ready. Save up kind of a chunk of money, right, which is what we start doing here. What you'll see is the asset management fund. We don't lose this $8 million debt gap. What happens as this drops is this difference goes towards your capital fund reserve, and then you wait for the right time, interest rates to drop. You use some of that pay-go money and you borrow at that time and take advantage of lower interest rates, and that's when you do your facility renovations. Okay, but I'm preserving your debt capacity in the future in this model.
Just a small comment. Just because our debt capacity is 120 to 140 million does not mean that we have to incur that debt.
You don't have to. That's a policy decision.
Yeah,
I think your
okay.
facility renovations will cost more than that.
Okay.
That's just reality. You gotta look at the rest of the region, how,
I'm sorry,
you have to look at the rest of the region, how much facility renovations are costing.
yeah.
It's gonna be very expensive. And this is today's dollars. I can't imagine in the
Yeah.
thirties.
But that's a decision.
Well,
10 years
we've
from
had a
now.
bad history with debt, so.
Oh, absolutely. But no,
That's
this
a
is a
concern.
response. What this number here is a responsible way of doing it.
I'm sorry.
When I say your debt capacity is this,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is this is your responsible debt capacity so that you maintain your recommended debt targets. You don't exceed that.
Okay.
That's what you can do without negatively impacting your budget. Okay?
Okay.
That's kind of what we said. But again, to Councilman Kerr's point, that's down the road, right? But I'm always
Yeah.
looking to the future. I'm always trying to set up the future for success.
Yeah.
All right, debt to budget ratio, this just kind of shows you kind of where we're going, and again, that debt ceiling, right? That's what I'm preserving, so you guys never exceed that again. Because that was what was hurting us the last few years tremendously, was being higher than that. We brought that down significantly. And this is kind of the recommended debt zone for the future. And you can see you have capacity in these latter years, which is perfect timing for when you need to do some major renovations. General obligation debt, you can see the schedule for when it's dropping. And the key takeaway, just like last year, you're going to have more cash in the bank if you kind of continue the current trends than you will owe debt in the 2030s. So that's good news. You'll be in an incredibly strong financial position, so improve your credit rating at that time. Reserves, again, we're budgeting to be under the targets, but I believe you're going to get to the targets because of annual surpluses. That's the takeaway from this slide. Along with, again, the asset management plan. This is huge. This has been TBD for the longest time, but you just approved, right, the funding of that asset management plan. Next year, you're going to have a much more informed number of what you guys need to save for that. So that's very exciting. Your operating cash fund stays healthy. And I'm not going to go over this, but you guys can see kind of what happens to your fund balance, what your audits your future audits will look like if you stick with the model. Rainy day fund is underfunded, but again, I think you can get that with your annual surpluses. You can build that up. And CIP, I'm going to spend more time on that next week, so I'm not going to go into detail there because next week we present the CIP, but kind of the big takeaway, right? Your total CIP of $147 million, $101 million of that is transportation. That is your CIP. It's a lot of transportation spending, but it's good news because it's funded by grants. We've gotten a lot of money for our city from the federal government and from the state to fund our transportation capabilities. A lot of this is also ARPA, right? In ARPA in FY25, you have the Signal Hill Park renovations of $2.8 million. You also have the remaining smart meter project and SCADA for a sewer system, $1.6 million. The item we talked about at the public hearing, the community development building acquisition in 25, how much you have set aside for that. And then the fire station renovation in FY29 that they're going to need, $3 million if you do it in FY29. And then the ladder truck, the replacement in FY31, 34. Those are the biggest drivers of your CIP. And that's just kind of a summary, a high-level summary of the CIP. This is your capital budget. You can read this and think about any questions. Again, next week we're going over the CIP. The departments will be here, and they can answer any specific project-based questions that you may have. And I'll go over, kind of do the overview as well of the CIP. And this is your asset management fund. Again, this is what I'm talking about with as your debt drops, you start building this fund. This is your future pay-go capital, and this preserves your debt capacity in the future. Any questions on general fund before I move to water and sewer? No? Okay. For water and sewer, again, a 3% rate increase. And again, you can see we're spending a lot less in capital, but you'll see on the next slide, UOSA is up and water purchase is up. And even during the year, this is a higher number, right? We had to keep increasing this during the year because we get kind of correction bills from Manassas and from Prince William County as well. But those are your largest kind of operating, fixed costs. You have personnel costs as well. I don't consider those to be discretionary because you have to have an actual crew as well. So there's not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to the water and sewer fund. But we're keeping rate increases below inflation, and the only way you're going to get that down is look at your CIP and look at those tap fee revenues. You get more tap fee revenues, you deal with your CIP without any contributions from these rates, and you can get rates down. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. So I'm sorry, this is with the tap fee revenues in '25. When you look at the CIP, when you look at the spreadsheet, look at that row in your CIP. That's what you got to get up in order to reduce rates. And then here's just an operating view, taking out your capital. You can see kind of the increase. The main driver of that is your increase in UOSA costs. You also have, again, the pay raise, the same VRS and health insurance impacts that I talked about earlier. Your 10-year operating model for the water and sewer fund from an operating standpoint and contributions to capital reserves. You can see we're doing heavy amount of capital expenditures in FY25 and 26 as we look to spend down that large reserve now that we're in a much better general fund financial position. That's been our posture the last couple of years. And then again, it's you don't have to do that anymore. You kind of spent your money, now you're kind of rebuilding it so you can go from a negative position to a positive, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the average fee rate growth is about 3%. And again, that's capital spending is going to be driving that along with inflation. Your average budget growth is average around 1% over this model. You can see how small it is in FY25. So your average growth is under inflation. Debt, this is kind of, along with tap fees, this is kind of your saving grace as well in the future. Your debt starts to drop in FY30, first with UOSA debt, and there's no forecast right now of needing additional capacity for UOSA. You will probably still have increased debt payments in UOSA as they do existing facility upgrades, right? And they do pass that debt along to you all, but there's nothing you have to do from a capacity. Same thing with water. We bought more capacity, and Calvin can talk about that next week if you guys have any questions on that from a capital standpoint. We bought too much water capacity, and so we don't need additional debt for that going in the future. So that's going to be a significant ease on your rate burden after that. But again, you're spending a lot of your reserves. You're going in a negative position. You're building it up. Once you get to that point where you've kind of stabilized the fund, you can, and if you've increased your tap fee revenues, you can start talking about reducing rates. Or if you do increase tap fees revenues right now, you can start talking about reducing the water and sewer rate as well. But tap fees are going to be the only way you do it in the short term. The reserves, again, you can see we're going to be under target. We're only going to be about $1 million compared to $11 million right now. That's because we're spending that down on the capital requirements that we have. And here's the water and sewer operating fund. Like I said, it dips to negative, then it gets back up to positive. And that's a policy decision as well. You guys can look deep into the CIP. You can ask Calvin and Alan about these projects and all the phased improvements, the water system improvements, the equipment they need, all the repair work they have to do. But you can see most of your CIP for water and sewer is going to be this debt, but that eases off as you go to the tail end of the model. And that's that tap fee revenue I was talking about. Grow this, and you start achieving significant surpluses here, and you can deal with all this, right, and without impacting your fees. Okay, and then this is just the capital budget for FY25. You can see there's about a $3.1 million decrease from 24. But that's the 24 budget amendment where a lot of things rolled over from 23. So it's a pretty kind of stable spending from a capital standpoint. The biggest project for next year is the rugby yard improvements, which we've been trying to do for a few years now. For stormwater, the good news here again is we've continuously, so when I started here, the rates had to be increased pretty dramatically. We had were issued kind of EPA DEQ mandates to deal with pollutant reductions, and you guys had to establish the stormwater fund back in 2017, the actual fee, and then we've had to unfortunately increase that to be able to address all the requirements from the federal government. The good news is, though, again, we're receiving federal money to help reduce some of that impact as well. So we've decreased the rate increase model consistently over the last few years from these changes. In the long run, the one area of concern for stormwater is going to be your Connor Center industrial area. It has a lot of outdated infrastructure that's going to be expensive to fix. That can either be a burden for your stormwater, or you can subsidize it from the general fund. That's going to be a policy decision you guys are going to have to make. You can do that from a general fund perspective. You get some development, you throw some of that cash to fix some of that infrastructure, but in the long run, that's going to be a big thing that's going to bite you guys in your ability to keep rates down is the Connor Center. Again, you have some increase in pay and benefits here as well, and then your capital liabilities continue to drop. And this is kind of a summary of what we've been able to save. We saved about $4.3 million in the 10-year model by changing the project to the bird sanctuary, and then we saved an additional $1 million through the congressional directed spending funding package that we want. So we've been very successful in winning congressional funding, even for security projects like the school project and then the stormwater project. Operating budget, again, this just shows it without the capital expenditures. I'm not going to repeat, but the only thing to show is that this is starting to show you kind of the savings from a dollar perspective. Had we not won the $1 million to pay for the bird sanctuary project, the fee would have gone up to $280. Instead, it's like down to $222. So you save that money for residents on an annual basis. And this is the 10-year model. I won't really go over this, but this is kind of pretty self-explanatory. You can see capital is a little bit higher in the first couple years and then starts going down as you finish your bird sanctuary project. The rate growth, again, 2.5%, and this just shows the total dollar savings we save residents by winning the congressional directed funding plus the change in project. Over $700 saved to residents by doing those two things. Based off these mandates, they would have had to have spent additional $700 per resident to accomplish the EPA mandates that we had. So we've saved residents a bit of money. And then this is the fee growth chart, and this has gone down compared to the last 2 years' budgets. Again, it would have gone up to 280, right? So it used to look like that. We keep shrinking it with the wins that we're getting by securing federal funding, and we're not going to stop with just the bird sanctuary project. Average growth is around 0%. The sharp decline in 27 is just because you finish the bird sanctuary project, so your capital spending goes down, and then you kind of adjust back up. Stormwater reserves, again, you don't really need to have a target for the stormwater fund. You just recommended you don't go negative, right? You try to stay positive. Here, we're going negative because we're trying to ease the burden on our residents, but in the long run, it kind of goes back up to positive once you're done with all your capital liabilities. The one risk, the caveat is how you decide to address the Connor Center infrastructure. If it's stormwater funded, this will go down if you don't adjust the fees up. But if you're going to general fund it, then these fees can kind of keep going down and the fund can remain positive. But that's going to be a policy decision you guys are going to have to make. Again, this is the 10-year CIP model for stormwater. 35% of your total capital spending is just that one stream restoration project. That's all this is showing. Your capital budget for FY25, the assumption is in that first expenditure row is that you're going to start your bird sanctuary project in FY25. We'll probably receive our funds from the federal government this summer, so we can kick off that project. And lastly, solid waste fund, so a 5% increase in the rates. That's down from 8% from last year, so we keep reducing the model in terms of rate increases. That's about a $1.18 monthly increase to the bill, and that's to cover the ongoing kind of increase in contract services and the fact that it's still in a negative fund balance, so we're trying to at least get to a flat positive as well. But it was the municipal host fee, I forgot the term, that's what's generating some additional revenues to help reduce that fee increase. So that was a good decision you guys made a few years ago. And again, here we also have the same impacts with inflation, pay raises, and the VRS program as well. You can see it's a fixed kind of 5% growth. That's down from 5.9% last year and down from 6.6% the prior year. So we're going to keep decreasing that as much as we can each year. And adding more payers is a way to do that. So this is just showing us in comparison to Manassas. So the Manassas rate today is $31.59 for single family and $35.38 for townhomes. You can see where we are in FY25, so much lower than that. We don't even get to that number even by FY29. So we stay below the Manassas rate. So we have highly competitive rates when it comes to the trash fee. In last year's model, this number would have been $33, but again, we keep saving money through efficiencies in the trash fund to reduce that rate increase.
Really quick, does Manassas City, do they contract their trash, or do you do it internally?
Yeah, I believe they contract it, and who's the company? Let me get back with you on who the company is, but they contract that out.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it's American, yeah. And then here's just a view of kind of the monthly cost of trash fee increases per year and what the annual amount is. It's $14 in FY25. These are the enterprise fund balances, so you can see they all kind of go towards negative. Some of them stay negative. What that means is we're kind of doing the bare minimum of rate increases needed to fund everything we have to fund while allowing these funds to go to negative, which is never recommended, right? I never would recommend this, but we're trying to balance financial best practices with the demand of our residents to keep rates as low as possible, and that's what this reflects. Hopefully, again, you keep having annual surpluses that prevent you from going negative, and that can get your trash to a positive without increasing rates on residents. And then this is what your total fund balance picture looks like with the general fund. You have a little bit of cash crunch in 26 through 30. That's why I'm saying we have a really tight budget over the next few years, but from a fund perspective and a cash perspective. Your enterprise funds are not helping. The general fund is kind of staying relatively flat, but things do improve in the 30s. But until then, you're really going to have a tight budget unless things change with development. So next steps, we'll do CIP briefing on April 16th. We won't go over every single project. It's going to be more kind of a Q&A. I'll just give you guys an overview, and then we'll do a Q&A for each department. If you guys have questions on specific projects, we'll do departmental Q&As on April 22nd. If you guys have any questions specifically for the department, or we can push that back to the 30th, depending when we get you the budget book, so you guys have enough time to look at each department's budget and ask any questions. But we have that April 30th budget work session if we needed to go over that, and you guys can spend the 22nd if needed kind of deliberating on what model you want to go with in terms of tax reform. May 7th would be the final budget meeting for you guys to set the advertisements and to adopt the school board budget resolution. June 4th would be your public hearing, assuming the rest of this goes well. June 11th, I'm sorry, that's not a budget vote, that's a typo, that's just a budget work session, so please correct that if needed, right? Then June 18th would be the earliest you could vote on the budget. Your key decision points, what kind of tax model do you want to go with? Is it either the 139 real estate tax rate and the $4 personal property tax rate, right? Keeping that, so you're no longer the lowest real estate tax, or the highest real estate tax rate in Virginia, and still below average personal property tax rate? Or do you want to go with the 142 real estate tax rate and still have the lowest personal property tax rate? That's a tax reform decision by you all, and then this will all have implications on pay raises and frozen positions as well. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're evaluating this. And then any other edits you want to make to the budget. The spreadsheet is now uploaded on the finance department page in the budget, FY25 budget, so you can go through the spreadsheet. What you'll notice in the CIP is everywhere where you see red highlights in fiscal years, that's where we've cut CIP stuff to balance the budget. So you'll see which projects have been cut or deferred to be able to balance this budget. That's all I have.
Wow, thank you, Laszlo. That was a great presentation, and it really shows that a lot of work went into this, so thank you. Yeah.
It was a tougher budget this year
Yeah.
than normal, just a little bit tighter than what I've hoped.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Quick favor, can you send us the link to it so we don't have to go?
Sure, I'll
Okay.
send that. Or Sarah, can you just email them the link? Thanks.
Thank you. And then, as you were talking, some questions kind of popped in my head, and I won't go through all of them. But the one thing that came to my mind is, do we know how many staff members might be retiring in fiscal '25?
That I don't, I'd have to, I mean, you never know until they submit it.
Right, but
Yeah.
you kind of guesstimate
Yeah,
based
we
on
can try to
years
do
of
our best to
service.
guesstimate, yeah.
Okay, so I thought that, for me, that would be kind of helpful to have. Let's see. If we also could find out, if you could also recap for me what positions are paid by which fund, that would be helpful as well.
Sure. Yeah. The challenge with that is it's,
Some
all
are
these
spread,
positions are, they're split.
and that's fine, if I
Yeah.
can just get an idea of whether position A is 20% out of Fund B, 30% out of.
Yeah, I'll send you a tab that kind of shows the percentage it splits by the fund.
Okay. And then, let's see, and to kind of recap, we're talking about what I heard was reduce the real estate tax, increase the personal property tax, and we're going to increase the water.
Yeah, so the water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater, those are separate enterprise funds.
Yeah,
Yes, all of those, water is 2%, stormwater is 2.5%, and trash is 5%.
so 3, 2, 5, so
And I
about
put the
10.
dollar amounts as well.
Okay.
Can't do the dollar amounts for water and sewer because that's going to be variable based on how much water consumption.
Right, but we're talking, if I added all three together, 10%?
10 percentage points, sure,
Yeah.
if you want to, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Palco, Mr. Manager, thank you for the presentation and gave us some options. The concern I do have is increasing the car tax 25% on working.
I can't hear, can you speak up to the mic?
Sorry, still have throat issues.
Yeah.
I appreciate the presentation. The concern I do have is increasing the property tax on working class people in this community. Many people use their vehicle to drive, and the cost of vehicles have gone up, so I do have a concern. The other concern I have is we would still be the highest tax jurisdiction in the Commonwealth of Virginia out of all 95 counties, 38 cities, because we are a single jurisdiction. What you're using is the county and a town model together, which they have two governments redundant, but we would still be the highest.
If you're a resident of Herndon, you would be paying a higher tax rate.
Yes, for two governments, for
Sure.
duplication of governments. We're not
But
getting
you
that.
would be paying a higher tax rate
Yeah.
if you're a resident of Herndon, so.
You would,
sorry.
but you would have two governments, is that correct?
You have a town government in addition to
I
county,
agree, we
yes.
don't have that here. We have a city government equivalent to a
Correct,
county government.
no, it's
still-
not equivalent to a county government.
Yes, it is.
That's not true, no.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Why
Anyhow,
are there
we
towns that
would pay-
exist? Sure.
So if we had a town
The point,
here,
okay, the true statement is, if you're a resident of Herndon, you'll be paying a higher real estate tax rate than Manassas Park under
and
this
the true
policy.
statement would be if you have a single jurisdiction government, you'd be paying the highest tax rate here.
All
That is
cities pay
correct.
higher tax rates than counties.
No, they don't.
Yes, they
No,
do.
don't.
Yes, they
No,
do.
don't.
Yes, they do.
Norton
Yes,
City
they do.
pays 65%. Danville pays 50 cents. What are you talking about?
In Northern Virginia, look in Northern Virginia,
Oh, we're talking about Virginia, the whole.
we're talking about Northern Virginia.
Your language, I don't want to go back and forth.
Are we in
Your
Northern
lang-
Virginia or
Your
are we in the
language
rest of
stated
Virginia?
that we
Are
would
we in
still not
Northern
have the
Virginia?
highest tax
Are we
rate
in
in
Northern
Virginia.
Virginia? Are we in
I
Northern
know where we're
Virginia?
at, but you said
Correct.
Virginia.
So look
You
in
said the
Northern
Commonwealth of
Virginia
Virginia.
and look at the tax rates of the cities, compare those to the counties. Only outliers Fairfax City.
I'm just,
We're not Fairfax City.
you said
in
the
terms of tax
Commonwealth of
rates.
Virginia, the highest
I
tax
said
rate.
Northern Virginia.
You
Yeah,
said
but I said the highest tax rate in all
the
of Virginia.
Commonwealth of
correct.
Virginia, that was your
Because
language.
you're a resident, if you're a resident in Herndon, you will have a higher
And you have
tax
two
rate.
governments, correct?
You will have a higher tax rate.
You'll have
I'm
two
talking about
governments.
tax rates. I'm not talking about number of governments. I'm talking about the tax rate.
Manipulation doesn't work. I just want the
No,
residents.
it's not a manipulation. It's an
I just
actual
want the
fact.
residents to know.
It's a
you
fact.
There's
It's a
two
fact.
tax. Yeah, they have two governments.
It's a fact.
But it did give
It's
options.
a tax
so I
rate. I'm not saying
appreciate-
the number of governments. I'm saying the tax rate.
And I'm saying two governments.
Okay, and I'm saying tax rate.
Okay, you're saying that. I'm saying
We're saying two different
governments.
things then.
Yeah, well, you are saying two
Sure.
different
So
things.
I'm not saying what I'm saying is not wrong and what you're saying is not wrong.
No, you are saying it's wrong. We'd have the highest tax rate. But anyhow.
No, we wouldn't.
Yes,
That's
we
not
would.
true. It's
Yes,
not
we
true.
would, the way
No,
it's
not
taxed.
true.
Anyhow, so, the other option is, so, it gives something to think about. I just have a concern about those two things, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Again, that's a tax reform discussion you guys are going to have. I'm making my recommendation. You guys are the decision makers.
It's not tax reform. It's tax increase.
It's tax reform.
Are you, do you have a follow-up?
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Questions?
Oh, no.
Well, I'm glad to say I'm not the only one who argues with Mr. Carrera.
Not effectively, though.
I think we all do. I think that's our pastime.
I fight for the residents.
First of all, Mr. City Manager, thank you for the great presentation. I mean,
Pull your mic down.
thank you for the great presentation. I'm always impressed with your budget presentations and your mastery of the numbers and budgets. It is, and I have served with many as city managers. It's definitely one of the best.
Thank you.
As far as giving us data and information and transparent. So I appreciate that. And our citizens can go to the web and play with the numbers if they want. So I appreciate that. But I do have some questions, concerns. The ladder truck promotions. What does that do? You say hold off until FY '30 to the ladder truck and its operational consideration?
Yeah.
And have we considered selling the ladder truck if we're not going to use it until FY '30?
Well, you can use it, you wouldn't have the proper rank structure to effectively utilize it. That's what it is. Essentially, you're eliminating kind of leadership positions that are needed. So that is on the table, though. If you can't properly staff it, do you need to keep it or not?
Yeah.
And none of these freezes are good for the city.
No,
They all
no,
have
no, it's
negative
not. I mean,
impact.
it's not like I want to sell
Yeah,
the
correct.
ladder truck, I don't.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, as a discussion point,
It's a
we should have the
legitimate discussion
conversation.
point. Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, so the promotions was something that concerned me. I think you may have answered this with Councilmember Hampton. Can we get a net impact on our residents when you factor in the property tax, the personal property tax, the water increase, the sewer increase, stormwater increase, what that would be for, like we do with the average house, the average citizen, what that increase would be on an annual basis?
Yeah, we can certainly do that, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. That would be
Yeah.
helpful for me. I think it's great that we're freezing positions. I think we have to. And I just impressed. I personally want to just say to my colleagues, I support the lower property tax and raising our personal property tax up. But I don't think we should raise it up to 4. I think it should be the same with Manassas, and that's 3.6.
Okay.
So that would be an increase. So it's 0.4 less than what you are proposing. So I would love to know what that would do to
Sure.
your budget. If
And just
you
a reminder-
raised- If you made us equal to what Manassas, our neighbor, is charging.
And just 2 years ago, we were at 350. but
Oh,
we
yeah, we've
reduced
been
it
great
during
reducing
COVID.
it, yes.
Correct.
We reduced it last year, I
And we just,
remember.
even though assessments kind of jumped back down last year, we
Yes.
made a policy decision to still keep it low to help our residents, but you could say that was artificially low. It was essentially keeping your real estate tax rate higher than it had to be, if you want to look at it that way. But yeah, I can factor in kind of a model of 360, and so you still have tied for the lowest personal property tax rate and what that would do for the other things.
Appreciate that. Because then that would get us equal to what Manassas is charging for cars, and since we're neighbors, it might be, makes sense.
And you would still have the lowest personal property tax rate.
And we'd still have the lowest
Whatever,
personal property tax, which I think is a goal that we should strive for here on this
Sure.
dais.
Okay.
So
We'll
thank you.
plug that in the model, and I'll kind of show you what the implications are for that.
Thank you. That's it.
Follow-up? Oh,
Nope.
Okay. Do you have questions?
No, he asked already.
Okay, okay. Can you clarify the ladder truck issue? If we needed that ladder truck to respond tomorrow, would we be able?
Right now, no, because the 15 people, the SAFER grant, are still in training.
Okay,
So the question is, when they're done training and they're ready to equip it, could they theoretically staff it? Yes,
Yes.
but you wouldn't have designated leaderships without the promotions. Usually you'd want to lead it with a lieutenant role, right? So the implications for that, you're going to have to ask Chief Soper for the Q&A, and whether it's worth it to keep the ladder truck if we can't properly
Okay.
staff it with, I wish we could, but again, the budget's tighter than what I would want. So that's a question you're going to have, and what the
because
negative
if it's usable, I would favor keeping the ladder truck, because we had it once, we got rid of it, then we got it again. So if we get rid of it again, it seems like we're going in a circle.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what it feels like, so anyway. Yes, ma'am.
So a couple things. The first one is, can you point us to some reports from economists talking about what's going to happen this year and next year? We've got an election coming up. It always seems to throw a wrench into the economy.
Yeah.
Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Who knows?
Yeah.
Let's roll the dice. The second thing to consider when we're talking about that ladder truck is look at the municipalities around us and how they're building up. My concern, and I don't really have to base this on anything other than just a gut instinct and just a little bit of common sense, we're looking at Manassas City that soon is going to be replacing like Manaport Shopping Center with housing. They've got more housing coming online. You've got Prince William, more housing coming online. How does that impact us when it comes time for reciprocation, when we have a big call? Now that they're being stretched, how can they help respond to us? So that's something I think we need to fold into our conversation when we speak with Chief Soper.
Yeah.
And I need to stop talking.
What?
I said I need to stop talking.
Okay, right. I won't ask you any more questions. Okay. If we were to fund the zoning enforcer, what would we have to give up? What's the cost?
You don't. There's nothing to give up. So the model that I presented, you do fund it.
Yeah.
So what I'll see now, I'm going to plug in Councilmember Moore's idea and see what so I'll prioritize to keep the zoning enforcement officer
Okay.
as one of the things, right? If you guys wanted to keep doing that, and cut some of the other things maybe as we take that strategy.
Yeah, I'd really like the group to think about hiring the zoning enforcer. I'd like everyone to give that a lot of thought because, you know, I am concerned it impacts the community. When we have these illegal renters, that's more garbage on the street, that's more need for parking, that's more impact on infrastructure, and we don't have a zoning enforcer, and I'm sure that the word is probably already out there on the street that Manassas Park does not have a zoning enforcer, that we're not proactively trying to crack down on that. So, yeah, if everyone could please give that a lot of consideration.
Yes, question. Can you show a model what it would be if we went down to the tax rate on the property tax to 3.5 and just do a 2-cent rate reduction and what that would kind of measure out? The other piece, I did suggest a 40-hour work week, and I don't know what your thoughts were on that, a 40-hour work week, 8-hour day with a 1-hour lunch, so that would be an incentive to the employees. My employer does that. Is that something that you recommend?
I mean,
There's no cost to that.
We can certainly survey the employees and see if that's something they would want to do. I mean, if that's a benefit to them. We may have to reduce city hall hours by that 30 minutes, just depending on the ability of them to maintain kind of staffing.
There may not be a cost to that at all, and that
I
would be
don't
an
think there would be,
incentive,
no.
because it's an 8.5-hour day, so it'd be an 8-hour day with 1-hour lunch included, and that would bring morale up, specifically at a time that there is some morale issues now, so.
Yeah.
I would like to see numbers on that.
Thank you. So you guys want me to plug in then two models, a 360 and a 350 for personal property tax?
That might be helpful.
Yeah.
Isn't 350
That might
round,
be
and we should just we'd still be lower? And you could do 2 cents.
Let's just
Well, we
stick
don't know
with-
if we could do 2 cents.
Let's stick with
No, I want to stick with
360.
Manassas Park,
Yeah, let's
360.
360 and 350 for right now.
Can I get a consensus?
Sure, it's the both.
Do both?
Yes.
Do both.
Yes.
In my 40-hour week,
Do both.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
So do you want to plug in both a 350 model and a 360 model?
Both.
Or just 360? Okay.
Both.
I have a question for
Some more work on me,
Councilmember
but-
Moore.
I'm 360. Yes.
I mean, I've never worked at the state or county level. I know you did, granted it was in another state. I know in the federal government, it's 30 minutes for lunch, and you have to work 8.5-hour days and then 30 minutes for lunch. When I was in private sector, I think we had to put 8 hours in, and that was excluding lunch. When you worked in the jurisdiction that you did, what was the,
It was what Mr. Kerr said. It was 9 hours with an hour, 8-hour workday with an hour lunch.
in
Okay.
the 8 hours.
Yes.
Yes.
so you worked 8 hours you had an 8-hour day, 7 hours of work, 1 hour of lunch?
But it's paid, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's the way it should be.
I think that's the way I had it in private sector, so.
Yeah, I didn't in private sector. I guess I worked in the wrong places.
Well, in the consulting world, they overwork.
It's not
No,
consulting.
never.
It's not the consulting world.
Huh?
It's not the consulting world.
No, I'm just saying that's from our experience. I think that's the
Yeah.
reality.
Never.
Any other comments or questions? No? That was a very impressive budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'll come back, I'll model both, and I'll show you kind of what the options are
Yeah.
with both. With
Yes.
what the tax rate can be, the real estate tax rate, but prioritize keeping the zoning enforcer at least staffed.
Thank you.
And the
Thank you.
40-hour work
Yeah.
week.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll look into that as well.
Okay.
If that's something you guys are all in agreement with, the
Yes.
40-hour work?
Well, I thought you said you were gonna survey or.
You want me
Yeah.
to survey first
Yes.
employees and
Who,
see?
And is there-
who would be opposed to that as an
Who
employee?
knows?
Really quick, is there any impact?
Well, that's
now
what I need to see is the
to
operational
HR,
impact.
like to HR, to benefits and such? I only ask that because remember back in the day, I had a lot of staff that would go, they didn't have enough hours, vacation hours, and they would take leave without pay. And at a certain point, that would
Yeah.
trigger issues with
You'd
their
credit them
HR.
as worked, but again, I'll talk with them, I'll also talk about kind of the necessity of potentially having to shut down City Hall for an extra 30 minutes as well. All that I think would need to be looked at before
Yeah.
we do something like
I
this.
mean, you can also stagnate it. You can have employees come.
If you have enough employees.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the
I
question
mean,
is,
if
do
you
you
do.
have? Yeah.
Okay.
So he has work to do in other words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Moving on to number 7, is there anyone who would like to make public comment? Seeing no one and hearing no one, moving on to city manager's report.
Nothing to report.
Okay, no, you've
You
done your
reported
duty. We have no closed session. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you, everyone.